A very good evening. You're watching our rolling coverage on the Interim Budget 2024 presented a few hours ago by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. As expected, no big bang reforms as expected, no changes in tax slabs, and the ever elusive target and the roadmap of the target to 7 trillion and the dream to become a developed economy by 2047. Are we getting there? Will we get there? Will we get there fast enough? And will we get there in an equitable manner? These are some of the key questions that we will be discussing over the next 40 minutes or so with two stalwarts of the Indian economy who've been watching the Indian economy and the global geopolitical and geoeconomic events for decades. Let me first begin by introducing our first guest on the show, none other than the economist, the famed economist and the full-time member at NITI Aayog, Dr. Arvind Virmani. Dr. Virmani, thank you so much for joining us on this very busy and a very special day on the evening of the budget, and it is a pleasure to have you here with us. Sir, my first question to you, everybody was expecting and all eyes were on FM to have some sort of a roadmap laid out for the $7 trillion economy dream by 2030. Do you think the FM in her budget speech has done justice to laying out that roadmap?
Yeah, the way I would put it is slightly differently. The goal is Viksit Bharat, and there are intermediate steps. For example, one of them is you have to go through becoming an upper middle income country and then a high income country, which is what the Prime Minister envisions when he says Viksit Bharat. So I think certainly what the budget did was to show what we have been doing in this direction and what the government would continue to do. And very briefly, there are three parts to it. I'll give the overview and then we can go into the details. So the way I look at it as an economist, which is my job, of course, he would have political and other things and communicating with the public, but the three basic parts of this of sustained fast inclusive growth and development to become Viksit, to become developed. So the three parts, important parts are the sustaining fast growth. So there issues like reforms were emphasized, past reforms and assurances of continuing reforms, the public goods infrastructure, again lots of examples of what has happened and what will be done, will continue to be done. The second part is the empowerment, and in some way there's two parts to it. One is Antodaya, I call it, the poorest of the poor, but the basic approach, as the Finance Minister said, is to move from entitlement to empowerment. So there are of course basic needs which have to be met, but the idea is to strengthen the base so they have the capabilities to earn and develop on their own. And of course this is to cover every citizen of this country in every geography. So empowering the whole population, different groups, every group. And the third part is what I call, which may not be very clear, but which I think is equally important, that the viewpoint is for both these is holistic and pragmatic at the same time. And I'll just give you one example, is the green economy. There are a lot of people, different solutions, arguments about climate change, etc. The approach will be, and it's a very complicated issue. So have a overall holistic approach and do all elements, because it's not clear that there's only one way to get there. Be pragmatic about it. That is what I would say is the overall approach. And some of the things, words she used was reform, perform, transform, and the emphasis on technology, FDI, etc.
Right. So, reform, perform, transform, Viksit Bharat. Dr. Virmani, being an economist, you're pretty much, echoing what the Finance Minister also said in her budget speech today, which again seemed more like a reiteration of the Modi guarantees as opposed to a real statement of accounts and a real statement of expenditures going forward. So, how do you react to that, sir?
So, the budget with a globalized economy, the audience is not just the domestic audience. What I am trying to emphasize to you is for the international audience. So I have not mentioned a whole list of schemes, etc. but the emphasis very clearly on development, Viksit Bharat, I think is also a message to the international community, because this is a golden opportunity, and the emphasis on sabka prayas, that we must all get together and participate in this national effort. So for example, when there's talk of youth, he's also inviting the youth to look for new opportunities. There will, of course, he puts it in, there will be a lot of new opportunities. That is the aim. Obviously, we have to see how that happens. But the idea is to tell them, don't just think in conventional terms, be open to other opportunities. There's entrepreneurship and other things. So you can say, the politicians will focus on the part you just asked me, but as an economist, I focus on the inclusive growth part of it.
Okay, Dr. Virmani, since you were mentioning you're talking to a global audience, and I think the geopolitical, geoeconomic scenario is not something that we can ignore given the situation the world is in right now. So to your mind, what are going to be the real drivers of economic growth? Do you think we can export ourselves to growth? Do you think there is domestic consumption which is going to be the key driver, or the government's capex and the investments that the government is making in infrastructure? What will drive India to a developed economy by 2047? In your opinion?
That's a very good question. Let me start with what's in the budget and what has been in the budgets, and then I'll go to the broader issue. So it's very clear that the government has emphasized capital expenditures, and this is firmly grounded in economics. So what is the economics of it? First is that the quality of budget, when people talk about, they always think of the share of capital in a thing. The second thing is that investment is what drives growth ultimately. And the third is what is called, drawing in, I forget the word right now, the complementary private investment. And studies have actually shown that the expenditure multiplier for capital expenditures is 2.45. So we have proof that this has actually helped in getting growth rate of over 7% in the last 2 years. I basically say the over percent is fully due to this. So that is one part of it. The second part, your broader question, there are several elements. I'll just mention a couple of them, and then again you can pursue. So one of the key ones, which is now very clear in the mind of GOI, is that there is a big opportunity for getting manufacturing supply chains into the country. So this is both the global environment, the domestic changes we have made in reforms, etc. And now it's very clear. I just joined the government 14 months ago, but I have been talking about supply chains for like 3 to 5 years. And earlier it was not fully clear whether his government is completely. Now I'm convinced that government is fully on board. They are going to grab this opportunity because it's the large opportunity for manufacturing, labor-intensive manufacturing, labor-intensive exports. The second part I'll just mention again, that there are going to be many new opportunities in services, and the source of this is the demographics of the world. The share of working age population in the developed countries, in most of our potential competitors in the East, including Vietnam, Thailand, etc., is going down. The only country where it's going up, and China of course dramatically going down, and the only place where it's going up is India. And there'll be many opportunities for a wider array of services. So it's all these. The simple slogan again I can give you, which is skill for India and skill for the world. So that is definitely a part of the government's policies.
Okay, we will come to manufacturing subsequently, but since you had mentioned infrastructure and the capital expense of the government, so talking about the capex, Dr. Virmani, there has been an increase by about 11% for infrastructure development, from about 10 lakh crore rupees to in excess of 11 lakh crore rupees. Now, can we expect in the full budget, when it is likely to to come through in the month of July this year, that the focus of this delta on capex is likely to be on green infrastructure?
See, the growth in expenditure cannot continue at 30% forever. So what I had said even before the budget was that it will stabilize. And as you just quoted, and the minister said that it is now 3.5 percent or so of the 3.4% of GDP. That's a very good substantive level, and the issue was only whether it will be maintained, and the minister has assured that this is going to be maintained in future. So that is enough in my view. So for what? So again, a lot has been done on building highways, in building railways, in building metros, in building airports, ports, etc. The downtime in ports has gone down dramatically over the last 10-15 years. So what the budget is indicating is that we are going to extend this and make sure that every part of the country is covered. That's how I would read the intention for the future. So if there are gaps in the railways, there's announcement of various corridors to make the time taken for logistics even quicker. There will be the connection between ports and others, the multimodal transport, etc. So think of it as extending the infrastructure to every part of the country and removing bottlenecks. One of the things one learns in growth theory is that even if you think you've done all the reforms, new problems arise when growth actually speeds up because of your reform. So that is how I would read the government signal, that as new problems arise, we are going to address them.
Right. So since you're talking about reforms and the speed of reforms and the multiplier effect that reforms, especially in infrastructure, will have on the larger economy, Dr. Virmani, I also want to understand from you, since you were specifically talking about manufacturing and PLI previously, do you think the full budget in July is likely to overhaul PLI, which hasn't seen the kind of uptick that was expected, even though the economy review suggests that some 7 lakh jobs have been created and investment to the tune of over 1 lakh crore rupees has come in. But how much of that has gone by way of PLI, we don't know as yet, out of the total outlay of 1.97 lakh crore rupees. The budget speech today was silent on that as well. So do you think in July we can expect some sort of an overhauling of PLI?
So very good question. Let me take a few minutes. You've taken a few minutes. When the PLI was initially introduced, it was designed to close the scale gap with China.
Right.
Okay. And I'll tell you why and where that is obviously applicable and where it may not be. Okay. So very simply, the economics tells you that the average cost is a curve which goes down and flattens out. So that curve where it turns is called minimum efficient scale, and our scale was lower than that, while China is way out there. So what we needed to do is get to the minimum efficient scale. So the incentive PLI was designed to give the incentive to companies which are below the scale to get up to the scale, so they can compete at least on scale with the Chinese companies. So that is the original intent. Now it turns out that you have to look at every industry and see how far this is applicable, and clearly in the electronic industry, in ADP, what we call, in telecom, this is certainly applicable. There are other complicated goods like capital goods, etc., where it's applicable. Now for others, one has to see carefully whether there is a problem of scale or not, and restrict this type of PLI to those industries. Now the attempt has been to modify the PLI and apply it to a lot of different industries. I think perhaps that has already been reviewed, and I think there would be corrections. I mean, that is the approach which should be, that you go along and you correct the policies as you go along, and I expect that to happen.
Right. So corrections, I think, is something that industry is also expecting, and investors looking at participating in India's manufacturing story are also hoping for. But I want to shift your focus now, Dr. Virmani, if you'll allow me, to the green energy transition. And that is something that we were hoping that in the budget speech, some very robust announcements are likely to be made. Unfortunately, barring, just touching upon gasification of coal, biogas, and the rooftop solar panels, which are going to offset the electricity bill on households that install the same. Overall, the budget, on all previous budgets as well as this budget, hasn't really seen the kind of robustness which is required to put India on track for both 2030 for meeting our renewable energy targets and the 2070 net carbon zero mission. Now, I think at some point we were lucky that our oil prices, thanks to the Russia-Ukraine war, a blessing in disguise, we were able to keep our oil prices and the import bill in the narrow lane. But, that was a surprise, and that is not something that is likely to sustain. So, for this overall net carbon zero green energy mission, are we on track, sir?
Okay, another very good question. So you mentioned oil. So that is one of the areas which I worry about. I have for 30 years, since well before I was CA 20 years ago. So the solar is very important from our perspective, relative to most other countries, because we are so heavily dependent on oil, and it's not just a matter of availability, but at the cost of oil. When the cost of oil goes to 80, 90, 100, 120, that is a big negative for us, because it's kind of like a tax on all Indian consumers in a way. I mean, whether you shift the budget or you give less or more incentives, etc., it's just an internal balancing. That money is gone. So the solar part of it is very important for us, and I would see this incentive which is announced is a way of getting people involved in thinking about these issues. So there is, we know for the last 5-7 years that solar production has been the cheapest of it. Whenever there is a auction, it's all done through, I mean, the private sector says we'll do it through solar. So right. On the margin, the solar is the most efficient right now. Okay. And it's just a matter of promoting it, and what the government is doing is giving a further signal to the public that this is important. The right. second part of it, there are 2 or 3 other issues. The other part is that bio is our thing, We have a lot of animals, we have a lot of agriculture, so getting into the biogas, etc., in a modern, technologically sound way is very, very important. So that was the second part of it. And the third is the toughest. I'll tell you why. I don't know how much time you have, but you cannot increase the share of solar beyond a certain point unless the storage becomes cheaper, because right? So that is that's the tough part. We are thinking about it different ways. I wouldn't assert that the full answer we have, but that's where I said holistic and pragmatic approach is there, and certainly you will see more steps in the future.
Sure, I think as long as that intent is there, and as long as the intention is there, the answers will be found. But I know you're on a short time window with us here, Dr. Virmani, but I can't let you go. You being a renowned economist, I think there is one question I've got to ask you. As an economist, what does it make you feel like when you hear new definitions for acronyms that are used in regular economic parlance with a new definition that the finance minister has given today? I'm talking about GDP and FDI. How does that make you feel as an economist when you hear new definitions?
I always feel a little, I don't know how to put it, some of these, words, professionals or experts may laugh at, but they are very important communication device to the public people. It doesn't behoove us economists to just soar with our slogans and professional terms. I think it's an important thing which we cannot do, I cannot do, but it's important. PM is a master at it. He is able to translate these complicated things into something that would resonate with the people. So in that sense, I welcome it.
Right, Dr. Virmani, always a pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you so much for taking out time on a very busy day, and I'm sure you would have had many other TV interviews also lined up, but thank you for speaking to News9 Live. Well, I also have now with me my colleague Shweta Kothari joining me. Shweta, you heard what Dr. Virmani was saying. I want to understand from you, what was your first reaction when you heard a new definition of GDP and a new definition of FDI? That's something I want to ask Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal also. But I mean, how does that make you feel for a student of economics and somebody who tracks the economy? A brand new definition.
The first thing that it brings me to is the fact that this government has very innovative acronyms for everything.
Right.
And it appears like Finance Minister is actually following Prime Minister's path when it comes to using these acronyms in a very rather effective way, because these words, they leave back some impression in people's mind, and these bags are, these acronyms can easily be recalled. So there's a recall value to it, and then there is a new definition that is proposed by the government. So essentially trying to ensure that every person, whenever whenever they talk about FDI, as opposed to talking about foreign direct investment, they're talking about first developing India. So I think the fact that these are commonly used parlances in economics, these are parlances that many people use to talk about India's growth story and whether India is doing well or not doing too well, because we heard Shashi Tharoor saying that although there was a new definition to FDI, Finance Minister never talked about how much FDI has been coming
and circumvented the dip in FDIs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the dip in FDI was never touched on. So I believe it's an interesting opportunity for a government to come up with new words, new acronyms, new parlances that can be easily used in a daily language amongst people in the media, which is what is making us, you and I, talk about it
Absolutely.
today.